And there it is already. Hi everyone, it's John again, and we're back with Colin Wright of Exile Lifestyle. And last time, until we were, as I was saying, really interrupted by the internet connection and stuff, we just got to the heart of his story about how he was really just kind of wondering about making that transition from entrepreneur to author. So Colin, maybe you could take us back to that moment then when you really kind of were wondering, if you were doing the right thing and kind of what kind of things is going through your head.
Yeah, I mean the main thing, the hardcore concrete memory that I have from that time period is the struggle of redefinition. Because for my entire life since I was, well, an adult really, since I was 19 and started my first business, I had thought of myself as an entrepreneur. And now for the first time, I was considering a transition that would make it more likely that I would like introduce myself as an author, which seems like such a small thing, but when you are your work in a lot of ways, when you are married to the work that you do, that redefinition is like changing spouses or something. I mean, it really is a massive plane shift. And so what I was looking at was doing this and not just changing the name, but then maybe taking a bit of time to learn what the industry was like and how to actually make a living off of it. And this was, to put it in perspective, I mean, this was what, 2009, I guess, maybe beginning of 2010. I think end of 2009, maybe. So the Kindle like had just come out and it wasn't
Oh,
a thing
right.
yet. Like, so people weren't like reading ebooks and it wasn't
Mm.
something that anybody had figured out how to do. And so I was kind of stumbling and shambling into this industry, not knowing what the hell I was up to and not really having anybody to look at who could tell me what to do. And it did end up taking some time. It ended up taking 8 months before I made enough money to pay my bills. And so that was like 8 months of living off of the little bit of buffer that I had left over after paying off all of my debt when I left LA.
Wow, but that's pretty incredible that you were able to do that for 8 months, though. Just basically live off what you had saved up and everything. So, like, can you talk back to a little bit, even to like, what kinds of things did you find yourself doing to kind of just keep things going then and stuff?
I lived very frugally. For a while there in LA, I was like living it up in the way that you're supposed to when you're young and have money. But it never came naturally to me. I kind of had to play it up, and because that's what you're supposed to do to show off as if you're someone. And so for me, just like left in my own state and doing things that I enjoy, I really don't spend much money. So it was nice because I was making a whole lot, but I had a whole lot of debt as well. So I had like $15,000 or $20,000, I think, in the bank. That was all I had to my name, and then suddenly no clients and no work and no anything,
Mm.
and I was in a foreign country and I had no idea what my expenses would be like. And so I was able to live that long without worrying too much about it. But it did start to get down to, the four digits instead of five. And I was starting to think really seriously, did I make a huge mistake?
And then, what kept you going though? Like, what was it that kind of like helped you to kind of start seeing that light at the end of the tunnel?
I was just having such a great time, to be perfectly honest. I mean, the money was starting to come in a little
Mm.
bit, and I had written two books and given them away for free as a way of drawing people into my blog. So I'd gone through the process a couple of times without making any money off of it. And the third time I wrote the book and then sold it, and I made some money. It wasn't anything close to what I would have made before. It was pocket change, but it was enough for me to believe that I could scale it and that it was something that if I did it repeatedly and over time and improved my method and actually learned what the hell I was doing, that I could probably make a go of it. And the big thing, the thing that kind of really clicked in my brain and made me think that this was something that was definitely worth holding on to for the long haul was the fact that I could write this book. I wrote one book and then continued to earn money every month without doing anything.
Hmm.
And this was revelatory to me as somebody who came
Mm.
from a service industry to create a product that was continuing
Mm.
to generate income even when I wasn't working was ridiculous and kind of an addictive feeling. Because if I continued to generate these things, if I continued to produce valuable products that people would want to buy, then conceivably, if I wanted to at some point, could just step away forever and then you're retired. And that wasn't something that I wanted to do, but the idea that I could was really addictive.
I think that's the thing that indie creatives struggle with is how do they know like something that is going to connect with their audience? Like, in other words, different times we have ideas as entrepreneurs, but as like artist entrepreneurs, as a writer, different times you struggle with like kind of what is it that like isn't just something I find interesting to write about, but then something that like my audience would gravitate towards. How did you kind of get a feel for what that
Well, a
was,
decision that I made really early on when I started the blog was to invite my readers to write me. And this was partially selfish because I hadn't traveled. I hadn't left the United States at that point. And so I wanted to hear from people who lived in these other countries, to hear about their lives, like what they cared about, what they did for a living, things like that. And so I got to learn as a result of that. But it also gave me a really good look into what the people who were reading my work liked about it, what they didn't like about it, what they found valuable, what they didn't. And so I, at that point, and still to today, have this really great feedback loop. As soon as I do something, I know exactly what people think about it. So I know exactly what mistakes I made. I know exactly what people love about it and what they'd like to see more of. I know exactly where my weaknesses are and where my strengths are. And so it's been really valuable. It takes time, but it's kind of like, creating like an artisanal crafted something that will last forever. It's the type of customer service in a way that takes a lot more time, but gives you a lot more value.
Was it like certain things that you did that you found kind of, like nowadays, in social media, it's all the buzz is about engagement and stuff like that. So was there like different things that you found that like people naturally would respond to more and stuff, like a certain way that you kind of, talked with them, or a certain way you kind of maybe
I
express
think
something?
in a lot of cases it was representing an extreme version of what people were considering themselves, or what they were thinking about, or what they'd always thought about. Like me leaving everything and changing careers and traveling the world full time and stuff. Most people just, maybe they want to change jobs but still work for somebody else and maybe travel more regularly, or they just want to take this one trip after university before going off to work. So it's like this not extreme version. So getting to see that really amplified version helps, because then they can see the pros and the cons, like as a cartoon almost. It's a caricature of what they could actually expect. But also, I think hearing the personal side of it rather than kind of the romanticized side, rather than every day being a party and everything being like a sex and booze filled lifestyle. It's like, oh, and I spent today writing, and I sat around and wrote, and I met this interesting person, and it's kind of the stuff that you're not supposed to write about, because you can't make a movie out of it. I think people really enjoy that side because it represents what people actually want, as opposed to what we're supposed to want.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, though. One of the things that I think you've talked about different times is the idea that you have kind of gone to extremes, and that's really appealed to your audience. But yet, at times, like you're not doing it just to be outlandish or something. You're still being very true to yourself. So how do you kind of, you talk about like that you find one of the most difficult things is striking that balance. So what was it that kind of allowed you to kind of, find that balance so that worked for you personally?
It's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of pushing towards something that then ends up being an extreme. Once you look at it later, you say, okay, that was not sustainable. My lifestyle in LA was like that. It was the extreme version of being a careerist and being somebody who lives up their success in a very particular way. I stepped back from that and was much happier. It found a better balance point. Somebody who can still be very involved with their career and love what they do, but maybe doesn't derive pleasure from the spending of the money and doesn't make all their economic decisions based on, the size of the paycheck. Likewise, with everything that I do in my life, I'm able to step up to that line and then step back. And that's part of the adventure. But part of what allows me then to continuously express that, I guess, and continuously share that is just kind of looking at myself and saying, do I like this? Am I enjoying this? Am I having a good time? Is this something that I'm doing for somebody else or for me? And as long as I'm doing it for me, it's authentic. I mean, that's the definition of the word. And so I'm able to kind of use my own enjoyment then as a yardstick for whether or not I'm doing the correct thing.
So what would you say, though, like in terms of like, certainly as you talked about that you felt like part of the time you were doing it for what you thought was the statuses and the things that people typically value, stuff like that. So what is your why now? Like is it the sense of adventure, or is it just the lifestyle of freedom, or what is it that what is your why at this point?
I am having so much fun. Basically, on so many levels. I mean, I feel great. I feel really great in terms of health, in terms of personal growth. I'm growing more and faster now than ever before in my entire life, just because of what I'm able to be exposed to, because of the people I surround myself with, because of the work that I'm doing and the nature of that work. And then I'm in a position too where when something strikes my fancy, be it something totally practical like going into video work or doing stuff with TV, or something completely impractical like spending an entire weekend researching Russia's involvement in World War I, or so, like I can kind of throw myself into anything that catches my fancy. And
Mhm.
I didn't know this for a long time, but it makes sense looking back. What makes me happiest is being able to just completely embrace and feed my own curiosity.
Yeah, I have to admit that that's really what fascinates me, to be quite honest, is that it's not so much that I'm like right now, like I'm very much interested in what you're saying and stuff like that, but yet, like I'm not somebody who like I find myself like gravitating towards any one interest. I'm curious sometimes what fascinates
Yeah.
other people. Like that to me is like yeah, is really fascinating. And to me, like like just even you mentioned something before about like kind of that you ended up being on a Bollywood music
Yeah.
video and stuff like that, like a commercial. So like so like how do these things kind of come up? Like what is it? Is it just part of different times? Like something that just kind of just happens from like different connections and different meetings and
Pretty
stuff? Like
much, yeah, yeah. And I have it's kind of a policy in a way, and something that I break sometimes when I feel like it. But typically, I try to say yes more than I say no, and so that takes me down a lot of interesting paths and a lot of unique experiences. But then I've learned over time as well that it's one thing to take opportunities when they arise, but then you can also set up your life in such a way that you stack the deck for more opportunities. And so when you put out a lot of tendrils and
hmm.
you create like an online presence or
Hmm.
create value or develop an audience, build an audience of people who are excited about what you're talking about, that creates opportunities. When you get out into the world and expose yourself to new things, that creates opportunities. So it's that the two sides of it, where one, it's creating more opportunities, like seeding the soil so that more things grow. And then when you find something good, you pluck it. You pick those crops when they grow.
So what would you say is like kind of at this point, like your proudest moment of like something that you felt like was a crop that you kind of stood back and kind of admired that you were able to kind of produce that
I'm
stuff.
still blown away that this whole book thing has worked. I mean, frankly, it really was such a crapshoot, and I had no idea, and it could have gone very, very different
Mm.
ways. It was really nice too that several years ago when I started Asymmetrical Press with Josh and Ryan from the Minimalists, that they were interested as well when I pitched the idea to them, that they were at the right point and that I was at the right point and that we were able to take the time to do it correctly. That was kind of a big turning point too, because we've both got our own, or all three of us have our own projects going on, but that kind of unifies some of what we're doing and allows us then to focus beyond ourselves, which is really nice. And that for me personally, at least, has been a another big growth opportunity, because it's allowed me to see if a lot of these things work outside of just my lifestyle, if they can be applied on scale.
What do you feel is like kind of your biggest lessons from doing that though, from finding people that you can work with and basically to put together a bigger project like that? In other words, you were you know working on your own and publishing your own stuff, and they were publishing their own stuff. So then, what was it that kind of you learned from that experience of kind of coming
Uh,
together?
Dealing with groups, actually dealing with them in particular, has been interesting because I'm more of a lone wolf type. I tend to do everything myself. I don't
Yeah.
even like to hire stuff out when I can avoid it. I'd prefer to just learn the software or learn how to write HTML and CSS or whatever. I just like I enjoy the challenge, and then I get to control everything. Whereas Josh and Ryan, they're actually delegators. They worked in the corporate world, and so Josh is a management wizard and manages the hell out of spreadsheets and likes to delegate like crazy and is very good at it. And Ryan is like the ultimate salesperson, people person. And so they're very different characters than me, and they want to run a business in a very different way. But we found as a result that we've got these three completely different points, and all 3 points, because they're so different, like support a much larger structure than I think we could do individually. And so they kind of taught me the value of having a group, because it's very, very easy to start things and grow to a certain point, but beyond that, it's incredibly difficult to manage something on scale as just one person.
So that in terms of the different challenges of that, what would you say it was like kind of some of the difficulty of making that transition? Like what was it that then if you kind of look back and wish you had known earlier, what are some things that maybe kind of were stumbling blocks for when you finally were up and running and stuff?
Initially we were trying to run asymmetrical like any other business, and so we were immediately thinking scale. We realized after the first year and a half, I think, that didn't really make sense for what we were doing. It's not something that we want to grow infinitely. It's something that we want to continue to grow, but we want it to grow as it makes sense, not just for the sake of growth. And I'm seeing a lot of businesses arise in this way now. A lot of like really cool businesses doing cool things that don't exist to grow infinitely. They grow just as big as makes sense. And then maybe you start another business, or maybe you just run that one happily and create something cool forever that stays the same size. And so for us, we're looking at that now where we've got a certain number of authors and a certain number of projects. It's really, really easy to maintain, and it's really easy to create a lot more value than energy that we put into it. So we're getting a lot out for what we put in. And now it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, how do we grow? And in what direction do we grow? And do we grow? And so that was something that was really different, really off center from what I thought it would be.
Like, what's interesting is what you bring to it is, like beyond the artists and author part and stuff like that, is the fact that you've had experiences with building businesses and everything. And part of that, of course, is what, artists especially don't think about much as entrepreneurs, is that horizon and stuff. So what do you see as kind of like, down the road, like the possible kind of, do you see possibly that, basically going your separate ways, or do you see possibly, selling to a big publisher? Or I know you may not be thinking about that along those lines, but I'm just curious as an entrepreneur, what are some of your ideas?
Yeah, I mean, right now, what we've been doing, what we've been focusing on is one, continuing to produce great written work, great published work, ebooks, audiobooks, things like that. But we're also becoming more and more vehicle agnostic in that telling a story is telling a story, communicating ideas is communicating ideas. The format that you use is like the least important thing about what you do. So rather than considering yourself an author, which means that you write books, why not just consider yourself a storyteller, which then means you can write screenplays, it means you can write movies, it means you can do all kinds of things. Video games. I mean, there's all kinds of amazing platforms, different vehicles for delivering messages these days. And so for us, that's been kind of the horizon that we're looking over right now, is trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean for us and for the authors that we're working with? What does it mean to be vehicle agnostic, and how can we help cultivate that attitude and make connections that we need to make in order to benefit from that? But then what does the company look like too? Like, do we continue to call ourselves a publishing company, or do we call ourselves a media company, or is that too generic? Does not quite explain what we're doing. So it's really interesting. It's interesting because there are no right answers, and that's probably the most interesting time to be in any industry, is when it's Wild West.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the other part, is that kind of, when one of the things that I came across is the idea that, like, how do you kind of basically give people something that, like, they don't even know what it looks like and stuff. And I think that's a little bit of what we're talking about different times. And I think as indie creatives, that's one of the things that we're constantly doing, is we're pushing the boundaries and stretching and kind of seeing, like, kind of the different interesting combinations that come up with, like technology and art and kind of the things that haven't been seen before. So, are there things that kind of excite you about kind of right now, some of these frontiers? Like, kind of, you mentioned some different things like, games possibly, or other media and stuff like that. So what are kind of things that, like, you would like to be involved with?
I mean, I'm a big technologist. I mean, I write science fiction in addition to everything else. And so I keep hardcore tabs on this, and I meet the people involved with it when possible. Virtual reality, augmented reality, haptic feedback. Like, there's a lot of technologies that are there that are just not hugely publicly accepted yet. They're not mainstream, but they're on the verge of being mainstream. And so what does it look like then to write a story for an augmented reality app, so that you're playing it within your room or something, or with a group in a shared space? How do you write for that differently than if you're just writing a choose your own adventure story? It's kind of a mind-bending thing, because again, there's not a lot of examples of this yet, and the ones that are there are kind of taking an existing structure and rebuilding it with new materials. It's like the Parthenon. It's a stone structure that has joints on it as if it was a wood structure. So they took like an old model of building and replicated some things that it didn't need to replicate in stone. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we avoid doing the same thing? How do we get rid of the stuff that we don't need in these new media and build something that is native to these new technologies? So that type of stuff keeps me up at night. Like, I am so excited about the direction that things are going, and then trying to figure out if and where I would fit in that, if at all. Maybe I'll just think about it and get excited and play the games. I don't know.
How do you take like some of the different things that you've experienced and stuff, and basically bring it into your stories and your writing? And so like what is it that kind of, is that transition though, from like kind of something that like you encounter or experience and stuff, and then that like how does that process go though, in terms of entering into your writing?
It's sometimes hard to even pick where individual components came from, because it's not typically a direct one-for-one. I was in a Bollywood video, so now I'm going to put a Bollywood commercial in one of my books. But like the philosophical stuff, the things that I'm thinking about usually end up in my fiction. For instance, I'll have a character who represents an extreme version of some moral standpoint that I think is relevant, but maybe not true. That happens quite a bit. Or I'll take descriptions or understandings of a certain culture, a certain way of life, and then work those in somehow. Like I said, it's all storytelling. It's all conveying information. And then it's just a matter of figuring out what's the best way to communicate this idea to people. And sometimes that's through an essay where you tell them directly, here's the idea, point for point. And sometimes it's showing them through a story.
So when you first get to your, like, let's say you get to your next destination in another, few months and stuff like that. So what is it that you kind of start doing to kind of start setting up your base for the next few months and stuff? What does that process look like?
Typically in the past, what I've done is just showed up, and then I go look for an apartment to rent, and then I finagle. It usually takes a day or two, and get in a place to rent for 3 or 4 months. And then after that, I start wandering around. I go to grocery stores, and I live like a local as much as possible. I ask locals where they eat, what they like, what they do day to day. There's a whole lot of me just showing up and being the biggest idiot possible. One, because I know nothing, and so I can't help but be an idiot. And then two, because it emphasizes that I know nothing, and then people feel sorry for me and try to inform me about what's going on. So it's like going into the grocery store and like holding something up and like looking desperate, like, what is this? What can you tell me? And then slowly but surely you learn things and how things operate and what things are. But you also tend to meet some initial friends this way, whether they're friends that you hang out with later or friends who are just very friendly individuals who teach you just enough, just what they can share while they're there. And so the whole first couple of weeks is a whole lot of that. It's a whole lot of being very comfortable with your own ignorance and growing as quickly as possible.
So if somebody was to say, and I'm sure you probably get it this all the time, is like that they want to live the lifestyle like that, where they're basically traveling around the world and writing and stuff like that. How would you tell them to kind of get started? Like, what are some things that you feel that like that you would offer as advice?
I would say, one, make sure that you actually want it, because a whole lot of this lifestyle, like, it's great for me and for what I want, but I mean, it's mostly like really uncomfortable. Most everything about my life is less comfortable than most people would prefer, and that to me is what I enjoy. That is a feature, not a bug. I grow most quickly when I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone, and so I am happy to enjoy this lifestyle. For most people, they wouldn't want to live this way. They would want some version of this. Maybe they would travel less regularly, but higher end, or maybe they would go to places that they're more familiar with or where the culture is more similar. So I'd say, first, figure out what you actually want and whether you want this idea but not this reality, or if you actually want it, that's cool too. Then I would say figure out where the money's going to come from. Because as much as it would be nice to just say, I want to live this way because it fits with my morality and my philosophy and everything that I want, but you got to pay for a roof over your head and for food on the table, and that's just a reality. So figure out what you can do that will bring value to somebody else and that they will pay you for, basically. Yeah, and then from there, you just have to decide to do it, because it's very, very easy to get those other things in place and then never jump, because it is scary and it's different, and there's very few people doing something like this, so it's not socially acceptable. But if you do decide to do it and you need somebody to tell you, hey, go do it, write me an email. I'm happy to be that terrible influence.
Well, that's a great segue, Colin. What's the best way for folks to get of you?
Oh, say again?
Oh, I was just saying. So, what's the best way for folks to learn more about you and
Oh
get
yeah,
up with
you can go to my blog, Exile Lifestyle, or you can check out my books and my speaking and other work at Colin.io. And I'm pretty much all over the social networks at Colin is my name.
Awesome. Well, it looks like the internet's cooperative with us tonight. We're able to sign off properly and stuff. So thanks, Colin. Really appreciate your time. I'm going to stop the recording shortly and stuff like that, but we'll just chat for a little bit after that. So thanks again. Really appreciate you coming on for a second time. And looks like things worked out a lot better this time.
Thanks
so
for
thanks
having
again.
me.
Alrighty. And